My name is Lauren Sardi. I'm a professor of sociology and women's and gender studies at Quinnipiac University in Hamden, Connecticut. I'm speaking to you first as a scholar and a researcher. I've spent the last 17 years of my academic career, beginning in graduate school at the University of Connecticut, studying the ethics and human rights implications of neonatal penile circumcision and the ways in which this procedure has been maintained and upheld in our society. This is done even though all national and international health and medical organizations note that the procedure, above all else, is cosmetic, which we have already established. And secondly, I'm speaking to you all as a parent. I support both bills that are in front of the legislator this morning. Obviously, as we've covered before, penile circumcision has commonly been described as a routine procedure performed shortly after birth, at least in the United States. In my previous research on medical providers and parents, I asked what the most common reasons were for parents to approve a circumcision on their child. We talk about things like basic hygiene. It is much less invasive on a person to just simply be able to bathe themselves, use mild soap when appropriate. We talk about, this common phrase that gets tossed around, that circumcision prevents UTIs. What we actually find is that you'd have to perform 100 circumcisions to prevent one case of a UTI. And certainly if a child with a vulva has a UTI, what do? We prescribe antibiotics. We do not circumcise them. Again, we talk about these lowered risks of HPV and STI, other types of STI preventions. Even if you're circumcised, you still need to use barrier protection. That is actually the only true way to actually fully, attempt to prevent these kinds of infections and diseases as they later may occur from a public health perspective. These are easy to obtain, easy to use, cost effective, and does not result in the permanent removal of a part of a person's body. We also get into other things like aesthetic preferences, matching the father, things like that, which are all culturally cultural considerations. Parents actually should not allow their own preferences of genital appearance to be literally circumscribed on their infant children. As a society, I think we would feel disgust if we heard parents discussing aesthetic preferences of infants born with vulvas. And so I will admit it's a bit perplexing that we do not have the same response for those parents who have children born with penises. People also give this argument of, well, what if they just have to get it done later on in life? And what I would say is that based on the best estimates that we have, only one out of roughly 16,000 adults with a penis need to be circumcised as an adult. And I say need, like there's medical necessity. Simply put, neonatal circumcision is not ever an appropriate prophylactic procedure to be done on neonates or frankly anyone who is too young to give direct consent. In fact, circumcision is literally the only procedure in the world in which parents are able to provide proxy consent to an elective procedure, no less one that permanently alters one's body forever. So truly informed consent, as described in medical ethics, the kind of informed consent we all get as adults for both medically necessary and cosmetic procedures, at least in theory, is not able to be carried out in the case of neonatal circumcision.
I understand the issue of what you're saying about informed consent and parents' rights, but where do you draw the line? Because we always talk about parents having the rights on behalf of their children. Is this not a situation here where the parents, by de facto, still have the legal right to make decisions for the children? Because that's one of the things we've been talking about is the rights of parents. Mm-hmm. And the state should not be infringing upon those rights. So can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, sure. I guess I would just counter argue that question, which is what other procedure do parents have a right to take a part of their own child's body off of them? I don't know.
An appendectomy?
That would be done for a medical reason.
Thanks.
Follow? Okay.
But I would also argue that, again, something like formula is, and I'm not suggesting, it's just not an equal comparison at all in any way, shape, or form. We talked about vaccines, not an equal comparison. Ear piercing, not an equal comparison. And so I truly mean when we talk about this is the only procedure in which someone's body part that is important is permanently removed. It stands alone. It really does. It's tough to compare.
Thank you. Representative Cushman? Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. You had said that there were about 1 in 16,000 medically necessary circumcisions in adults. Do you know what the rates are for dealing with complications of circumcision?
The best estimates that we probably have, and I've seen these actually in some consent forms, are anywhere between 2 and 5%, potentially more, and which I didn't actually say out loud, but what I believe is actually much more commonly the case is that we get revisions done because a circumcision is done, and because we're removing very small parts on a very small body. As a person is growing into their bodies, things change. So revisions might be necessary. But what also equally is going on is that when we talk about circumcisions that are performed after the neonatal period, we're talking about oftentimes issues that occur from lack of knowledge and lack of information on how an intact penis actually works, which is that the foreskin at birth is fused to the head of the penis. So when I hear things like, oh, somebody told me that I need to retract to clean under it, no, you don't. That's actually causing harm. It's causing damage. It would be the physiological equivalent, if you will, of trying to clean under your nail into the nail bed. You cannot do that because your nails are fused to your fingers, right? So that is what causes significant damage, and that is what leads to circumcisions in the post neonatal period.
Follow up?
Thank you. I was actually asking, and you did touch on it at the beginning, about revision rates for circumcision and complications from that. Do you know what some of those potential complications are for following circumcision?
There is significant research done on what those complications are in the short term. Usually what we see are things like adhesions, where the foreskin attempts to heal itself and sort of connect back onto the head of the penis. There are also other kinds of issues dealing with too much skin that's removed, so skin that's actually sliced off or removed from the head of the penis too. Things that have to do with uneven or jagged kinds of foreskin cuts, things like that. You can also see things like foreskin bridges that could occur. They're incredibly graphic. I think you'd probably want to search them.
Thank you.